Kristi and Tanqueray on the Rocks, the Trailblazers Toolkit.
On this podcast, we dive into the messy realities of corporate life that nobody talks about over office coffee.
Grab your cocktails and join us as we get real about work, life, and everything in between. Cheers.
Welcome back to Kristi and Tanqueray on the Rocks, where we dive into the world of work, life, and everything in between. Kristi and I are here with some special guests. Today, Kristi, we're going to dive into the topic of microaggressions. And we're going to start with just level setting on what is microaggression. So, Kristi, I'm going to start with you. In your mind, what is microaggressions?
Okay, so in my mind, I believe it to be little or probably not so little things that happen daily in people's lives that chip away at their identity or their sense of self, and that are probably on purpose or not. And whether they're known about or not, we have to do a better job of being aware so that we can eradicate microaggressions from the workplace. Now, I've never Googled it. I've never looked it up. This is just my own little understanding. So if it is not correct, well, I'm here to learn today.
Absolutely. I don't think there's one definition, right, of what microaggressions are. But we have with us three distinct leaders in their own respective spaces, and they're also here to talk with us about understanding of microaggressions and how it can chip away with us individually and collectively within our workspaces. So I want to introduce our first guest, Brae Richardson. Brae is a passionate brand and creative manager dedicated to fostering inclusive and equitable communities. She excels in crafting brand narratives, executing impactful campaigns across various platforms. So, Brae, how are you today? How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing really well. Thanks you again for joining us. Wanted to, again, just focus us in on what are microaggressions? And if you wouldn't mind sharing with us examples of how you might have experienced microaggressions.
Yeah, I think exactly what Kristi said, like they're small little things. I'll go on the example route and just something that's happened personally to me, which I've always heard, especially, so I didn't grow up in Charleston, but my family's from here. So I would have to visit it frequently. My accent was significantly different. And then, I would it would get, you speak white, I would get that from my side of the family. And then from non-Black people or majority white people, I would get, you're so articulate. So I would say those are subtle examples of microaggressions. And those are some of the experiences that, I've experienced. And then as I get older, I always get like, where are you from? Particularly being in Charleston. So it's always like, you can't be from here. So I feel like those are just the subtle like microaggressions that I would say are examples that I've experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the examples in that. One, hate that you've experienced that. And I too have experienced that because I often get, you cannot be from Charleston. Well, I can slide into my Geechee Gullah accent if I need to, but on most occasions, and that's a whole nother podcast, right? The code switching that we have to do. It's exhausting. But I see you, girl.
Yes.
I see you. I see you. Yes, and I appreciate that example. So, Sunny, I want to toss it over to you and ask you the same question. But before you jump in, I just wanted to introduce our listeners to Sunny. So, Sunny is a seasoned global leader dedicated. Sunny Myers is a seasoned global leader dedicated to fostering inclusive and equitable workplaces. Sunny is a passionate advocate for social justice and has worked with many organizations that are in the space of diversity, inclusion, and equity in the tech space as well. She has an engineering background. So, Sunny, tell us what your definition of microaggressions is and some examples where you might have experienced those microaggressions.
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. And I think with Brae, like the same thing, it's more examples, right? Can I touch your hair? Why are you wearing that? What is that you're wearing? Are those earrings long enough? I get asked very often. I remember I was going to a clean room area and I had a shawl on because workplaces are cold and so you have to layer up, and they were like, oh, you can't wear that, you can't go to this places. Or I had cute shoes on and they were like, well, how are you going to do your job? And I'm like, I have tennis shoes in my drawer, right? And so just those everyday slights, right? And it's predominantly to marginalized communities, right? And I call them like the paper cuts. I really think it's the things that just build up and that exhaust you. But whether they're intentional or non-intentional, it's really like that build up is really where the sting come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, are your earrings long enough? I'm still like that takes me back a little bit. That, you know, we feel comfortable enough to make comments about what someone might be wearing that they hold true and near and dear and is more of a cultural representation that they're proud of. I thank you for sharing that example.
I have
So
a question.
Zaidis,
I have
yeah,
a
absolutely.
question
Jump
about
into a
that.
question.
Yes. Are your earrings long enough? Do these comments come from men, women? Who is saying
Mm,
this?
Yeah, I worked in predominantly a male-dominated space, especially in engineering and tech, right? That's what you have, right? When 80%, 70 to 80% of your workplace is male dominant. And so, yeah, most of them were honestly just ignorance, right? Like, just I feel like sometimes at borderlines, they're trying to give a compliment and they're not equipped to do so, or not capable to do so, or haven't been taught to do so. And so sometimes it was like, good intentions, but also just what gives you the audacity to say that, right?
Yeah,
Like, I don't
yeah.
compliment on your polo that you just different color polo that you wear every day with khakis, right? So why do you care what shoes I have to do my job? Do you see me doing my job? Am I good at my job, right? Like, why is that a thing? And because I am different. When you look around the space, I'm the only, right? I'm the only one. I'm the only woman in most of the rooms that I have sat in. I'm the only woman. And so I am different. I like to wear bright colors. I like to wear red lipstick. I like to wear big earrings. If you know me, I always have big earrings on. I don't care if it's like going out to Target, I have big earrings on. And so yeah, in my culture, that's important, right? Like that is a part of our history as people, right? And our trades, and to show those. And I love to show the artisans. It's really a cultural identity to me and something I'm really proud of, and I look cute in them. And so they make me feel good is why I wear them. And so for folks to have the audacity to comment and then think I'm not capable of doing something or performing to their level because of that is just ignorant, in my opinion. But it does mostly come from men.
I can relate. The reason I asked is having um come from the wealth management industry. I was often the only woman also at the table with investments and with executive leaders talking about finance and portfolios and all of those things. And I often received comments about earrings and shoes, etc. Now, I wasn't marching around on a site or an engineering site, so I really don't understand why it mattered that I had high heels on that had glitter on them or whatever the case may be, because it really didn't matter. But when you say maybe they hadn't been given the language or they were trying to give a compliment. Do you know what I heard in my brain is what I tell two of my three children. And I tell my son this as well, but he's grown out of it because he's 16. Even in schools, boys, when they show they like somebody, they do it by picking on them, by not necessarily actually using their words to say what they mean. And that is something even in our own household with my cherubs that we don't condone. We redirect even other students outside of our household. I've even told my girls to say, I'm sorry, do you like me, and not have the words to communicate that? Like, this is a conversation they will have on the bus multiple times a week. Well, not now because people know better, but this is something that even in school, y'all, we're moms. We understand. And how many times have we heard, oh, that's just boys. Boys will pick on you if they like you. We normalize this behavior starting in childhood. And so it's
Very
very
young. Yeah.
interesting that it still shows up even for you, because it certainly does for me in corporate America as well. And I just thought that I wanted to close a little loop there for our listeners.
Yeah. 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 I could see that that connection. And again, the microaggressions could be subtle, it could be intentional, it could be unintentional, it could be that the person is fond of what you're wearing and they don't have the words to describe, all the things, but it's still, those micro cuts still hurt, and it chips away at the overall organization's culture. Because imagine if there are 1,000 Sunnies who are experiencing that, right? And they're feeling a little bit withdrawn, or, oh, I hate it when I'm uncomfortable when I come here. Like, that doesn't make for a great environment at all. So I
Yeah,
wanted
and
to
I
hear
don't think
from
it's
our
just oh, sorry, really quick.
yeah.
I also don't think it's just like what they're saying, but it's also the interruptions, right? We've all, I guarantee you, we got some heads shaking. We've sat around a space and been interrupted multiple times, right? And it's egregious sometimes, right? And so I do think it's just not necessarily the comments, but also the behaviors that you see, right? Rushing to get up and go get the best spot, right? And at all costs, or sitting in the front of the room, or whatever those are, with like no courtesy, and just thinking that they own that space, and they're completely, most of the time I would say they're completely unaware, right, of how to operate when there is others who are not of the dominant population, because they haven't had to.
Right,
So
right. Yeah. Haven't had to think about how I interact in a way that is promoting an inclusive environment, and for everybody to be engaged, to feel safe. Like, they just haven't operated in those spaces. So, um, well, thank you for those examples. I want to, introduce our last guest, Saibes. Saibes is dedicated to diversity, inclusion, and equity as well. Brings a wealth of information and knowledge as it relates to inclusive work environments, and empowering marginalized communities, and driving positive change. So, Saibes, can you tell us what your definition of microaggression is, and maybe some examples that you might have experienced in the workplace?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and kind of connect on a topic that um, happens pretty frequently. I agree. I think that it's slights that happen, whether intentional or not. I think that I was thinking about it the other day, like how would I personally define it versus a book definition? And I feel like sometimes it is a peek into what happens in someone's real home or real life. So it's like that's how you really are, or maybe how you really think. And that's what's kind of showing up or manifesting in your work world where you kind of put your armor on. An example I think personally that happens to me is my name is Saibes. Saibes Mari Munoz Isme. I'm a Latina. I am very proud of that identity. And there's power in a name. And I think at the onset, when you meet someone, you introduce yourself, you say your name. For the majority of my adolescence, all the way through college, I would be like, they're like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. What's your name? My name is Saibes. What? No, not what. Saibes. And then they wouldn't repeat it or don't say it. Or, I have colleagues that I've worked with for years that still say my name incorrectly after folks, even other folks on my teams have corrected them or refused to address me by my name. I recently completed my doctorate, which I was very excited about, and I got to write all about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you, in my reflection. And I was in a Zoom meeting, as we are oftentimes, and I think it was right after my defense, and a colleague on the call was like, "Oh, Saibes, congratulations! Dr. Saibes, I'm so excited to call you doctor. I know you've been working on this for a long time." And somebody else on the call was like, "Yeah, I'm not calling you that." I was like,
What?
"Excuse me?" So that was a little bit more overt. It wasn't subtle.
Well, wait,
It
did you
happened.
say you can't seem to get him a first name right? Maybe you can get Dr. right.
Exactly. So I wrote all about that too. You know, forget it. Now, instead of correcting them on just how to say my first name, I'm like, well, you can just call me doctor from now on.
Amen. That's
So
right.
that was,
Snap that.
stuff
I'm
like
gonna snap
that.
that.
Yeah, stuff like that has happened. You know, refusing to pronounce your name correctly, refusing to address you in a meeting. I get growing up in school, I always knew that when the teacher paused on the attendance list, I was like, oh, it's me, you
It was
know,
me. Yep.
it's
I just
me.
raised my hand like she,
Me
yep.
too. It's me. But then how does that manifest as an adult? Like, I don't get called on in meetings. Like, if it's a meeting that it's not people who know me, I'm like in another meeting with like new folks who kind of know me, they're not going to call on me. I will always have to introduce myself. Um, you know, awkwardly mispronouncing my name at like ceremonial events. So stuff like that. And then I have to choose, right? I think that also with microaggressions, there's a process that has to happen to the person who's being microaggressed, right? You have to choose and decide, do I address it? Is there a power dynamic? Is this my boss? Is this my CEO or president? Is this somebody who I'm going to have to deal with their fragility and response in me addressing this? And then is that burden back on me? Or do I approach with curiosity? Do I give space to kind of, well, you know, why is it that you refuse to call me
Don't
doctor?
pronounce my name.
I think that, and I called it out in that moment because the other people, I had some allies step up in that meeting and they were like, oh, but she worked so hard on this. Like, you know, she's a doctor now. And she was like, oh, but like, you wouldn't call me Mrs. So and so. And I was like, actually, I would call you whatever you told me that your name was, including your pronouns. And everybody was like silent and awkward. And I just like let it sit in silence. And I was like,
Good.
all right, great. So let's get started with this meeting that we called to meet about certain things. So kind of working that, because that, like you said, is exhausting. So these microaggressions are slight, but if it's you're having a bad day, it's already happened 3 times today, you know, you're navigating your own personal stuff. And then on top of that, you have to deal with this slight. I also think that microaggressions are like a whiplash. Like sometimes it happens and you're like, did that just happen to me?
Yeah.
I
It's
I
very
need to
triggering.
yeah, you're like, I
I
need to
don't think
process. In that moment, you're like, I can't even address it because I have to process what just happened because it was so gross or so racist or so hurtful that I need a minute to process this before I can even address it. And then you have to think about like, okay, how much time before I can address it, or do I address it in the next meeting, or what if it happens again? So the burden then becomes on that person. So, you know, it's great when you have allies and folks that can step in to do that, but it is exhausting, especially when it's like what Sunny said, you know, something that's constantly happens to you all the time. You get better, and I have, you know, 38 years of life to be able to properly address, especially with something that is me and my name. Um, but it manifests consistently and over time.
Yeah.
And if, you know, nobody's perfect, everyone's human. And sometimes I'm not having a best day. And I'm like, all right, let's explain this. Explain this to me. Or I can't take this on today. I don't have the
The
emotional
energy.
bandwidth to
hmm
process this or to call this person on this in this moment. I'm going to table this until tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I met Zaibis, Dr. Zaibis, uh, at an event in Washington, D.C. And when I'd never met
In
her before.
New York City. New
Oh,
York City.
hell, I don't even know where I was. New York City. Woo! New York City. You're right, girl. New York City is where I met her. And I'd never met her before. And a mutual friend had introduced us, and somebody else was kind of standing there. And I said, now tell me how I say your name. I want to make sure that I get it right. Because I heard her say the I. Now, I have a minor in Spanish and I studied abroad, but I heard her say the I in her name. And I said, spell it for me because I really want to get it right. And then she did. And I said, okay, I got it. Well, then I was introducing her to somebody else 2 minutes later. And it was somebody that she'd known, I think. And the person was like, is that how you say your name? And I was like, I looked at her and she's like, it happens all the time. Now, I want you to know, y'all, that I knew this woman for 5 minutes. And I know it might have been awkward, but for the first minute, I said, help me make sure I say it right. I think I hear a silent I. Spell it for me. Did I get it right? And then when somebody who'd known her for a long time, I said, oh, you probably know Zaibis. She's like, is that how you say your name? I was
Mhm.
floored So I want correction, firstly, as somebody in learning growth mindset always. One, I'm so sorry if that was embarrassing of how I went on and on to make sure I got
No.
your name. Hopefully that's what I'm supposed to do. But two, holy shit, I have never thought, as all of you just sat here and were like, not being called on because people can't pronounce your name, not being asked to something because people don't want to say your name wrong, not being addressed by your name. Because I know people say that saying, the most beautiful poem is somebody's name. Well, what if your name is hard to pronounce and you hardly ever get to hear? Like, I'm going to need my Kleenex.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know we were all kind of like shaking our heads and around the name, around the pronunciations, just around the triggering. So all microaggressions are not the same, but they do compile. And so then when you have to explain that my name is pronounced Tanqueray, and that's the 20th time that you've had to explain that, it's a pile on, right? And so Sunny and Brae, you guys were shaking your head as Zaibes was going through
Mhm.
her example. What was coming up for you guys? What was coming up in that moment? And if you could speak to what was coming up and how that, connects to creating that toxic environment for team members.
Um, I don't know. I think just the lack of self-awareness that people have, like, I think so my full name is Nabrazy. And so that's always been a thing for me. My mom has taught me to like, no, this is your name. People need to pronounce it this way. So I've always gone through that. I do not play about my full name. If you know my full name, that means you know me, like for real. And I do not deal with like, oh, let's put a joke on, let's put out my own spin on it. Don't put your own nickname on it. Like if you are calling my full name incorrectly, clearly you do not know me. And if you are, pronouncing it correctly, clearly you know me, like you're a close friend and you're a family. So I think, and it's always like for me, for when I was younger, like I've always, developed sort of like an aggression to my name because I automatically go on the defense, but I just like, I don't play about it. And then also some things that you guys were discussing, just I think even in the workplace of like different tones that you experience. Like I could see my coworker, we could say the same thing, the same tone. My white coworker could be like being real spicy with it. And I may like, they don't receive the aggression, but if I say the same thing or I reiterate things, I get a little bit more spice. And I think, I don't know, I just, as we're talking through these things as a Black woman, respectfully, like I am tired. Like I am just like, after the election too, like I did not go into my office and I had people calling me, my white coworkers coming like, I'm so sad. Girl, get up off me. I need a second. Like, I don't know. I just think about these things and I'm just like, I just don't think, like, I feel like as a Black woman and just even, as people of color, like we are constantly having to think of others and be, deal with all these things and deal with all these pylons. And I guess in short, when you say like, what do you feel? Like, I'm tired. I feel tired. Like, it's just like, ugh. And we're all going through these things and we're different women in different cities. And for me, it's just like, it's just tiring.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It definitely can be exhausting. So Sunny, you were gonna jump in and say, jump in and add to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm tired too, sis. Like I really had thought about like how to articulate like with the heaviness I've been feeling.
Yeah.
And it's really I'm like sometimes it's like mom brain, sometimes it's like my age, sometimes it's like juggling all the things because I am a superwoman most days. But yeah, it's just exhaustion of like the overthinking, right? The carrying the mental load, the emotional load in all the aspects of your life. I also think for me, like I'm in this new era of radical acceptance because in radical acceptance, when you have that, you can then make decisions that are grounded by the reality that you need to make those decisions in. And so when you sit in like the disassociation space, you're not able to make decisions that will protect yourself, right? And so I think I've tried to move into this radical acceptance phase And then I can then hopefully make informed decisions in that space. But also that's really exhausting too. And my radical acceptance in corporate America is like, it was never meant to
Really,
be
for
for
you.
me,
Mm.
ever. Like
Ever.
it, the foundation of what capitalism is and colonialism is was never for me. It was
Yeah.
totally against me. And so when I feel this heaviness of battling, you know, I say it's an uphill battle. My calves are just getting stronger, right? And so really, like, it's always going to be an uphill battle for in my generations, and in my community we have a thing where we build for now for 7 generations in the future, and we can change for 7 generations in the future. That's how mindful we are now of the impacts that we have on our future generations. And so when I think about the work that I'm doing now, like I wish there was like huge disruption and dismantling of systems of oppression and turn all the tables over. And the reality is it takes time, and it's little by little. And so, you know, and we do have those blips like 2020 that we see a lot of forward progression. And then we have 2025 that we will probably see a lot of, you know, backtracking, right? And we're already seeing it, right? And so I think that, yeah, the regression. And so I just like have this reality of like, this space was actually not built for me. And so I'm navigating a system that is not set up for me, people like me. And I do think that radical acceptance helps me then understand, is this for me to take on, right? What does my well-being look like? What does my mental health look like? How do I be a change maker in a space like this? The other thing that I think we don't call out, and I try to do, I am not, again, an expert in workplace discrimination and harassment, but I have done more presentations and speaking about it lately, because it has been such, you know, I feel like this came up like a couple years ago, this term, obviously microaggressions, but we really didn't talk through them as much. It was just so we were able to name the things we were experiencing, but like to actually have conversations of like, well, what do you do about it? How do you know, what can you do? How do you heal from it? And so I've been doing more of that lately. And one thing that came up is like, if they are egregious, consistent, right? Targeted, they're a form of harassment. So we hear workplace discrimination and harassment, right? There's policies against it in most workplaces and institutions, but we never actually say, what does this look like? You don't have to take those on. If they're coming from, you know, multiple sources, right? And then that's a cultural problem, right? There's a pattern of behaviors that the workplace is responsible for changing. If it's consistent from a human, like the same human, right? Then that's probably going to be a harassment thing. So the documentations of these microaggressions, while you might not think they are that egregious, like we really should be taking them when they happen and where they happen and how they happen, because it could be something that could be reportable in the workplace. And so that's something I think we miss or gloss over, because we are used to taking them, or we're used to getting, I mean, the older I get, the more witty I get and the more I respond, but I also have what I consider less at risk, probably because my seniority have more at risk, right? But I have more street cred, right? I'm also like, I'm choosing where I'm showing up and who I'm working for and what I'm doing in my work and where I'm not going to work. That's a privilege that I have built on, where I was more early in career. I didn't have that privilege, right? I had to take all that in and I didn't know any better. And so I want to make sure that in this time together, we realize that a lot of the things we're talking about is a form of discrimination and harassment in some level.